Hey, what's up, everybody? Good afternoon. Welcome to A to Z Sports Notre Dame, another live stream edition. Talking transfer portal, folks. We know now in the early portions of January, that's going to be what the conversation is for the next couple weeks. Obviously, the transfer portal opened on January 2nd, this past Friday. It's going to be open until the 16th, so you have a 14-day window if you are a player to enter the transfer portal. As we know, though, this thing moves very quickly. Not many players give it a ton of time because before the transfer portal opens, there is a chaotic sequence of a couple weeks when people know who are going to enter. Back channeling starts through agencies, and a lot of the interest that you're seeing generate after the transfer portal opens has already been happening on the back of everything beforehand. So some surprises happen and some interest picks up as guys kind of marinate in the transfer portal at times. But for the most part, a lot of these moves are premeditated and we know that they're going to happen. But as we also know, things can change in the blink of an eye. So I want to talk today about the early portion of Notre Dame's transfer portal. I called it a mess. I'm going to maintain that I believe it is a mess because we live in a reality, unfortunately, in every walk of life where we either have to be full on extreme to one side or the other. And in this instance, it's, hey, Notre Dame sucks. They are messing everything up right now. They're doing horrible in the transfer portal. There's no light at the end of the tunnel here. And then on the other side, it's the people that say everything's fine. Notre Dame doesn't even need to add anybody. When in reality, there is a lot of middle ground here. Notre Dame doesn't have to completely overhaul a roster like some rosters do, but Notre Dame had a couple key positions that they needed to add talent, impact talents. So there is that middle ground that we're talking about. So I am not here to say this is a mess that can't be fixed. What I am here to talk about, and I hope that we can find this middle ground potentially. And by the way, folks, got a little bit of a new setup with the mic, so please let me know in the chat if it sounds okay for you all. I just want to make sure that that you are hearing me loud and clearly, and there's no issues with the microphone or the audio. So if you could put that in the chat, I would very much appreciate that, just to make sure. But I want to talk here today about what I can believe is a mess to begin this transfer portal process and why the mess is happening. So we'll talk about the process. Okay, let's talk about the process and what is happening early on that I think there have been several missteps from the side of Notre Dame. And then we're going to talk about the other side, how to get to the end of the tunnel, how to feel good about this transfer portal process. Because while I don't like what I'm seeing right now, there is a reality where everything turns out okay. So this is not the doom and gloom. And somebody said I'm a clickbait podcaster, so I need doom and gloom. No, I don't need doom and gloom. Right now, though, the two realities that we can live in, and both can be true, is that Notre Dame is off to a rough start in the transfer portal, and a lot of it is Notre Dame's fault. And on the other side, also say, hey, we got some time here. There's some players still entering the portal. There is time to fix this. We can live in both worlds. I promise you that we can live in both worlds. So while some people want to paint me as super negative, all I can work off of is the information that I have right now. And the information that I have gathered, the things that I've been told, and I'm not talking just from the Notre Dame side of the conversation, because mostly when you talk to the teams, it's all hunky-dory. Everything's good. We're okay. We're fine. We're fine. We didn't even want that guy. Copium. We didn't even want him. Sure. When you talk to the agent side of the business, there's usually a different pulse. So for me, from this perspective of the media side, we need to talk about every part of it to paste together the reality and figure out what the truth it lies in between, because no person that is good in this industry is just talking from one vantage point. There's a lot of people that have sources, not even talking about Notre Dame centric, but like in any other beat out there, that can paint a rosy glasses view of what program they cover. But on the other side, there is a truth to the process that maybe isn't great. And Notre Dame is no different from that. So let's talk about all of it. Let's talk about all of it. Because I'm not going to sit here and say something to just cope with a couple early losses for Notre Dame. I am here to try to tell the truth from the agent side, from the Notre Dame side, and we will piece this puzzle together, hopefully. I hope that we can try to do that today. Yes, I agree. And I see people putting in the chat. And I would also like to say, any comments that you guys have, super chats go to the top of the show, obviously. But any questions you have, any things that you're wondering, any thoughts that you have, put it in. I like this to be as interactive as possible. I was once a teacher that taught during COVID, so I don't like talking to a screen unnecessarily. I like conversation points, and that is why I'm here, to hopefully have a good conversation, hopefully ease some tension, hopefully ease some minds, but also talk reality, also talk the truth. And we'll talk about player-specific stuff. I was one of the first to report last night that Keon Keeley, former Notre Dame commit in the 2023 class, who's been at Alabama the last couple of years, it was expected to be on campus today in Notre Dame, and they are a school of high interest for Keon Keeley. So there is some positive within the negative, and we'll talk about some player-centric stuff as well. But let's start with what I think the missteps are with Notre Dame. And while we can always do this, and I've already heard this already, and there's some truth to it, let's take the Wake Forest defensive tackle, Mateen Ibaragba, for example, that just signed with Texas Tech for a large portion of money. Notre Dame absolutely had some interest in him. There was no question. They were unable to get him on campus, but they were trying diligently. And while the final number figure might not have been as much as what Texas Tech ended up putting on the table, Notre Dame was highly competitive from a money perspective for Mateen Ibaragba. But the problem is that Notre Dame, I don't think, was as high as Mateen Ibaragba as maybe the media is. Because all we do, or the public is, all we do is we go on 247 Sports, or we go on On3, and we see their transfer portal rankings. It's like the high school recruiting ranking stuff. And you see, wow, that guy's a top 10 player in the portal, according to 247 Sports. And while they might think that, that doesn't mean that the team thinks that, right? And so I do think there is some truth to Mateen Ibaragba, maybe was not as viewed as highly by Notre Dame as some other people did, right? Or some other outsiders think. So I do think there's some truth to that, absolutely. But let's talk about the early missteps, and I think that the bad evaluations that have happened already, which is why we are sitting here today without any good news. I know people just say, like, I want some good news. I want good news. Guys, trust me, I want good news as well. For people that have never followed me before or haven't listened to me over the years, I am a Notre Dame fan. I always have been a Notre Dame fan. I've been a Notre Dame fan my entire life. I had a choice of what NFL team I rooted for. I didn't have a choice of Notre Dame fandom. Don't remember a time when I wasn't a Notre Dame fan. So do you think that I want to bask in the negativity? Do you think that I don't want this program to do well? I want Notre Dame to win a national championship because I was born in 1981 and I've never seen a national championship. So I sure as heck want Notre Dame to be very successful and win a national championship in 2026, which is why this transfer portal opportunity was so big. We know that Notre Dame has a lot of talent coming back in 2026, but there were obvious needs at certain positions. Talking about defensive tackle, for instance, you lost 5 of your top 6 from last year at defensive tackle. Notre Dame needed multiple guys up front to fill this rotation. You're not going into 2026 with Elijah Hughes, with Sean Sevillano, with Davion Dixon, with Cole Mullins, and feeling good about where you were compared to last year. You needed to attack defensive tackle in a big way. Wide receiver, I'm less worried about wide receiver because I do think there's a lot more younger talent in that room than what there is comparatively to defensive tackle. But Notre Dame wanted to add an impact player who has experience in the boundary. They wanted that. I wasn't the one that said, like, it's not individually Ryan Roberts, Brian Driscoll, any other person in the beats was like, hey, they need a wide receiver because I said so. Notre Dame wants a wide receiver. They want one. So this isn't a call to action. They don't see it the same way, and I'm mad because they didn't see it the same way. They wanted it. This initiative of finding a wide receiver in the transfer portal. So you need a wide receiver. At least they believe they need a wide receiver. You have defensive tackles, multiple that you need. You have a transfer kicker. They obviously had at least interest in a nickel early on with the Williams kid out of Iowa State that transferred to USC. So there is needs in this transfer portal. There is. I'm not creating needs. Notre Dame believes that they have needs in this transfer portal, which is why they are working the way that they are working and trying to get players on campus, and why you've seen a lot of reports about players coming on campus or trying to get players on campus that didn't end up going on campus. There is interest from the Notre Dame side. So that whole vantage point that I've seen out there of, oh, the media is actually creating this. Notre Dame doesn't have that many holes on the roster. Guys, it's baloney, man. It's absolute baloney. That is copium. That's copium. right there. Notre Dame needs multiple defensive tackles. They would very much like a wide receiver. They need a kicker, obviously. There are needs on this roster. You can pretend that they aren't there, but that is not how you get better. You attack the needs and you understand where your weaknesses are. So why am I upset about, or not upset, upset's not the right word. Why am I disappointed with, no, Tommy, you can't get a guest appearance. I need to see how your acumen is on these types of things, okay? So send me some clips of you on podcasts, and then we could talk about it, Tommy, okay? So I am disappointed with the early portion because leading up for this for about a week or two, I have been told Notre Dame is going to be aggressive in the transfer portal, and everything behind the scenes that I have seen says I believe them. Everything I'm hearing, I believe them. Well, you had several weeks to figure this out because you opted out of playing in the Pop-Tart Bowl, which I was totally fine with because of everything that went down. But if you were going to get extra time to prepare for the offseason / the transfer portal, why the 2 days after the transfer portal opens was there not a single visitor on campus? While Indiana is hosting Nick Marsh, while USC has Jontez Williams, the defensive back out of Iowa State, 2 players that were supposed to come here this past Monday, by the way. Despite that, despite other programs having players on campus that first weekend, Notre Dame chose to stay pat and wait till the next week. Why? I'll tell you why. Because I believe that there was an ideology on the Notre Dame side that this was similar to high school recruiting in the sense of they want the last shot. They want the last pitch. Sounds good in theory, except in recruiting, you get months and years to court these players to try to get them, and you ultimately get multiple pitches, and you might get a final pitch in the end. In this transfer portal chaos, guys, you only have a few days for most of these players. Barely any of these kids are going to stay on the market for multiple weeks. Barely any of them. So you have maybe one pitch. Maybe. And instead of making sure you get that pitch, you said, you go to Indiana. You go to USC. That is a flawed ideology. That was a mistake by Notre Dame because here is the selling point. I know people are going to yell about money, money, money. And I do think that Notre Dame is stingy with money at times. So don't get me wrong here. I think they are stingy. But me making a pitch to someone over the phone versus making a pitch to someone in person, even if I'm offering less money, is more impactful face-to-face. For anyone who has ever been on the Notre Dame campus, any person, whether you're a fan, a player, anything, an opposing fan, doesn't matter. There's a difference of being there and hearing about it. Hearing about it, you think, oh yeah, they have great history, they have this, that, they have great academics, all that type of stuff. But when I get on campus, there's just something different about it. Something much different. And let's say hypothetically, this is actually a hypothetical, this isn't something that's actually happened. Let's say Indiana offers a kid $2 million. And Notre Dame says, I can't quite get to $2 million, but we can go 1.7, 1.8 to get close to the relative range here. Well, that's hard for an agent or a player to hear over the phone. But if they have them on campus, you're talking to them face to face and they see Notre Dame, they see the mural, they see the history, they feel it. They're talking to the players. It's a much sounder and more impactful pitch potentially. That is why getting players on campus is so important for Notre Dame. Why did Notre Dame just go 26 out of 27 or 27 out of 28 in their official visitors on the high school route? Because those players got on campus. When you get guys on campus, I trust Marcus Freeman and this staff to be able to close. I do. I trust them to be able to close. You opted to be patient in a reality that it lacks patience. You needed to be aggressive. And I'm not talking aggressive in terms of payments. We can have that conversation. I'm not talking about aggressive in terms of promising kids things. Aggressive as in, we want you get on campus right now. Let's come. First day. We want you out here. It wasn't like you had a bunch of kids on campus and Nick Marsh and Jontez Williams said, no, we can't make it this weekend. We already have things planned. You didn't have a single player on campus. There was no intent to get players on campus that weekend. That is a flaw. That is a flaw. That has created a little bit of this mess that we're talking about. Because a few of the quote unquote misses we're talking about, I've seen people say, oh, is it really a miss? You never visited? Well, yeah, it was a miss because you wanted them to visit and you weren't aggressive enough to get them on campus. And this is all I will leave you on this conversation. Then we'll move to some talking points about players, because I still think there are some talented players that are still out there for Notre Dame to be had. And plus, there's going to be more that are entering the portal. This isn't over. They have until the 16th to enter. So there's going to be more players that enter the portal as well. We need to keep that in the back of our mind. That is context to consider. Yeah, I know I'm being dramatic. Sorry. I'm sorry for pointing out the very obvious of them having a misstep in the beginning. I'm sorry. My apologies. I'm a clickbait podcaster, according to someone before I even got on here. So wherever. My last talking point here is that I have talked to some people in the agent space who have been somewhat puzzled about Notre Dame's ideology of attacking the portal, which came off to me as very interesting because Notre Dame, thank you, Jimmy. I think I wish I could be a better clickbait podcaster. I'd probably make more money. Which struck me as an odd sentiment from agents, because if you remember back to last year, Notre Dame was in the middle of a playoff race and they still were able to get Malachi Fields done quickly. If you guys remember, Devonta Smith news dropped and Notre Dame was actually a little bit mad about that because they didn't want the news to drop because they were trying to focus on the playoff game. And if you think back to 2 years ago, well, Notre Dame had Riley Leonard locked up before the portal even opens. And we could say like, oh, tampering doesn't exist in college football right now. It just doesn't. Maybe it'll be a thing where the NCAA can lock up punishments for it and all that stuff. It's just not a thing. With agents involved, especially, these things are being back-channeled for weeks and sometimes months before the players even enter the portal. So I don't want to have that conversation. I don't. Regardless, over the last couple of years, Notre Dame has had their transfer portal players locked up before the portal has even opened most of the time. There have been rare into the portal battles for players. This is kind of new this year. Why is it new? Well, I asked myself, what's different this time around, right? What's different this time around? Well, I think that Mike Martin, who is the general manager at Notre Dame now, not going to cast the shame on him or say he needs to get out of here or anything but I do think there were some missteps from the very top of this program. I do. And that might be simply because he's an NFL guy and he has been practicing an NFL style for years and years and years, and he needs to acclimate to what it means to be a college football general manager. It's very, very possible. Very possible. So I do think that there is an adjustment period to Mike Martin that needs to be figured out, because I do think that has hurt them a little bit. There has been a little bit too much of again, it's not passive, because I do think that there's been aggressive in terms of creating a board, reaching out to agents, all that type of stuff. But I do think that there was a lack of aggressiveness early on, again, to get players on campus. That is most important early on. And you need to be able to lock up things before teams get desperate, ultimately. Because the longer you let players stay out there, the bidding wars ensue. The money kicks up. That's why most people want to have things figured out before the portal even opens. Before the surprises come and player X enters that we weren't anticipating entering. Those things always happen. But I do think that there were missteps from the top in terms of their process. The process, I think, was flawed. And I don't think that they had enough definites happening before the process began, if that makes sense. So I am not here to cast the axe on Mike Martin. Not going to do that. I'm not. You guys know how I operate. I don't really call for people's jobs. I tell you I don't think someone's doing a great job. I think Mike Martin has done a lot of good things so far from Notre Dame that I've been able to find, but I do think that there was a flaw in his ideology and his process for this period. But ultimately, and then I'll get to some players, I promise you guys, ultimately though, this is still Marcus Freeman's fault. This early portion of the transfer portal process. It can get better. Let me say that again. This can get better. And I think Notre Dame can be okay in the end. And I will look back on this conversation and say the process wasn't great, but the result ended up being okay. And it won't matter as much. But everything goes back to Marcus Freeman. And I would have hoped that the process would have been a little cleaner, even with Mike Martin taking a big part of this pie of transfer portal responsibility, from Marcus Freeman to say, hey, this is how we've done things, and this is how we need to move forward, and this is how we need to attack the process. I think that there was some things that just kind of fell through the cracks for whatever reason in this process. And unfortunately for Notre Dame fans, after what just happened this offseason with Marcus Freeman and flirtation with the NFL and the, run it back in 2026 thing and kind of being on I kind of phrase it like this. For me, Marcus Freeman feels like an NIL guy right now in terms of like NIL for the most part. We're seeing some multi-year contracts, like 2-year contracts for players. But for the most part, we're on a year-to-year re-up of contracts. And that's what it feels like for Marcus Freeman right now. We're planning to play in this thing, but year by year with all the interest that he gets. That's what it seems to me, right? And in that regard, the fact that you have went through what you went through with Marcus Freeman coming back as the head coach, there are going to be some people in the fan base. I'm telling you not to act like this because I think this is overreaction to a degree. There are some people in the fan base that are going to say he's letting things fall through the crack because he's got one foot out the door, and I don't believe that to be true. I don't believe that to be true. I want to emphasize that again. I don't believe that to be true, but it's all about the optics. It's what you see is what you believe. Right? It's the perception is reality stuff. So while I don't think that's necessarily true, I do think that it optically can look pretty bad for Notre Dame. But all that being said, and we're going to inject some positivity into the conversation before negativity creeps back in, I think Notre Dame could be okay. I think they could be okay because there are still players on the board that I really like, that I think can help Notre Dame in 2026 and can make this football team better. And I mentioned in my last live stream that I thought there was a Big Ten defensive tackle that was going to enter that I thought Notre Dame was going to push for a lot. Well, that player hasn't entered yet. And I don't know necessarily if he is going to enter, but I know that Notre Dame will have high interest in him. And if he enters, then things might be okay. Things might be okay. But the issue is that with the early miss due to the flawed process, in my opinion, you are now in a situation where you need to hit the inside straight. Like you need to. If you have a couple more misses, then you're looking at the board and saying, man, I'm not sure about this one. Like I'm not sure if this is going to work out okay. So Notre Dame can recover. I think a couple spots that give me optimism here is while the defensive tackle board right now is an absolute mess after Xavier Gilliam was predicted, obviously, to go to Tennessee, and it's likely that he has. It may very well happen while I'm on this podcast right now. I don't know if it's happened yet. But the anticipation is that the Penn State transfer defensive tackle is going to end up with Tennessee. And we've already seen, obviously, Matini Baragba sign with Texas Tech. And the Horace Lockett kid out of UCF decided to go back to school. So a couple of the targets on Notre Dame's board did go back to school, which means your boards have gotten smaller and smaller. Despite that, though, defensive end board is kind of interesting to me right now because as I reported yesterday, Keon Keeley is on campus. I talked to someone close to Keon Keeley, very close to Keon Keeley actually, yesterday before the news broke that Notre Dame has a high level of interest in Keon Keeley. And that is a very intriguing one because if you watch Keon Keeley this past year as a redshirt sophomore, finally get opportunities down the stretch, turn on the Oklahoma game specifically, Keon Keeley was balling out and looked like one of the best players on the field in a Alabama defense that has a lot of very talented football players. And Keon Keeley is especially interesting because I just saw Xander say, don't care about defensive end, defensive tackle sucks. Well, here's the thing though, Xander, to consider with Keon, if Notre Dame is able to land Keon after his visit today, is that Keon is a player that is now 6'5", 282 pounds, where he could be a guy that eventually transitioned inside, and he's a player that has 2 years of eligibility left. So while he might be a defensive end in Notre Dame, if you watch him at Alabama, Alabama plays a lot of three-man front where he's playing like 4-4-I, 5 technique a ton. So this could be a player, if Notre Dame's able to land Keon Keeley, that can play a little bit all over the place and can bolster potentially multiple positions. So I don't think it's as dismissive as, hey, he's just a defensive end. I think Keon could be a player that can come in and do a couple different things for the defensive tackle room. And I agree, Xander, that's not enough at the defensive tackle position. I am not saying that Keon Keeley is the end-all answer for the defensive tackle board right now. What I'm saying is that he's a part of the answer potentially. Because we can only work one-by-one players, right? There's not one answer that's going to solve every single problem. What I'm saying, though, is that Keon is a player that has versatility. He has the size. He has the experience now of playing in multiple fronts and playing for multiple alignments. And yes, he does defend the run well, and he's asked to do a lot of the dirty work at Alabama this past year. And I keep saying this one too, Sly, and I want to talk about that one. Sly says, I'm going to say Keedron Young. Move Bryce Young inside or Keon. Oh, yes. I'm sorry. I misread what you were saying. A lot of people have been saying, and I kind of talked about the Keon Keeley fit yesterday, and a lot of people said that move Bryce Young inside. And I think that Keon Keeley is much more, if Notre Dame's able to land Keon Keeley, he's much more likely the player that will end up inside because, again, he's already over 280 pounds, and he's shorter than Bryce Young. Bryce Young is 6'7", 270 pounds. He's another 25, 30 pounds away from potentially playing inside consistently. He can do some stuff in obvious passing situations, but like he's a tall, angular kid who's going to need more mass. Keeley, if he can get up to 290 at 282 pounds right now, he can play inside now. Like he's close, and he's had experience now playing from reduced alignment. So I do think Keeley is an interesting player. The other guy to keep an eye on, and it's not a certainty, obviously, at this point, and I'm not going to talk certainties in the portal with how Notre Dame's doing right now, but Francis Brouillou, who is a sophomore defensive lineman, so he'll be a junior next year out of Pittsburgh, is an extremely interesting player. And what about Keeley's academics? Don't think that's going to be interesting. Brouillou is a very, and I think I'm pronouncing it right, Brouillou, I don't know, whatever. Either way, he is going to be a junior next year, a Pitt defensive tackle. He is a player that is extremely interesting because he's not a big kid at 6'1". I was told by an agent that he's closer to like 285, 288. So he's more in like the Jared Dawson range than probably the Howard Cross range, if that makes sense. But so he's a smaller guy. And I want to get to a comment from Evan here in a second because I actually disagree. Oh, actually, no. I misread what I was saying. Brouillou is a very interesting player because at 6'1", about 285 pounds, you would think that he would be a guy that wasn't good against the run. But in reality, he actually holds his own inside. And Pitt doesn't just say you're a 3 technique, rush the passer, play 1 gap. Like he is asked to 2 gap at times. He's asked to play at the point of attack. So he's an interesting player in that I think he plays above his weight class. Now, Francis Brouillou is he's not a player where if you just land him, you feel good about the situation, obviously. You need the 2 to 3 guys on the interior for Notre Dame right now. You need it. But he has a relationship with Charlie Partridge, the new defensive line coach at Notre Dame. He recruited him to Pittsburgh. So he is scheduled to be on campus, I believe, Thursday. Today is Wednesday. Yes, I'm sorry. I'm losing my track of days at this point, folks. That's what the transfer portal does to you guys. He is a player, though, that I do think would be a nice get for Notre Dame, absolutely. Now, Tennessee's getting him on campus, a couple others after Notre Dame, but like when we talk about visit schedules, guys, usually transfer portal players will get like 3 to 4 visits planned ahead, but as we know, sometimes they don't make it to a visit because things get locked up while they're on one. So if Brouillou gets to Notre Dame tomorrow, Notre Dame needs to lock it up. That's it. That is it. You need to make it happen. Because he could be an answer to your problems. Not the only answer, but part of the answer. Needs to be able to get him. And we had a comment here that I just wanted to respond to real quick. We had Time Cone 57 said, what if Bryce is 305 pounds before 2026? He might be too big to be a defensive end, but nothing wrong with tall defensive tackle to disrupt the passing. If he is naturally getting up to 305 pounds, I consider it, obviously. If he gets up to 290 something, I would consider it. But I just don't think that that's a natural progression that's going to happen. Like if you're going to make him 300 pounds in the next 6 to 7 months, that is because you are putting a lot of mass on him very quickly, and sometimes that hurts athleticism a lot. So if that natural ascension from a body type happens, we consider it for sure, but we don't know for certain if he can even take that weight. So I just want the natural development to happen, and we'll have that conversation point if it happens at some point. But it's an interesting question. We'll see what happens next. But back to the defensive tackle board, Brio is the only guy that you feel good about right now. And again, I do think there's going to be a couple kids that jump back into the portal that will make some sense for Notre Dame, but you have now a very, very small amount of options that are in the board right now with Igbaragba off, with Gilliam off, with Lockett off. Notre Dame kind of needs to, I wouldn't say start from scratch, but they need to reevaluate things quickly. Because like I said, Keely can help halt some of those concerns if you're able to land him, but he's not probably a guy that's going to play all the time on the interior, but it's an option that you could potentially have on the table. And I saw someone ask, go get Armel Mukam back. I would be very open to trying to get Armel Mukam back, but I think that there might be I don't want to call it a fractured relationship there. I don't want to call it a fractured relationship because I think that would be I would think that would be a hyperbolic statement. But I do think that Notre Dame had a chance to get Armel Mukam back, and they didn't work hard enough to get Armel Mukam back. And I think that there is a little bit of I don't know if there's hard feelings there, but like Notre Dame just could have done a lot better with that situation, in my opinion. A whole lot better in that situation. I saw someone ask about the Utah edge. Want to make sure I'm getting... Well, yeah, and you can hope, and I saw someone else say, hope Jason Onye gets his 6th year. Yeah, I'm waiting patiently on that one because... Initially, when I heard that he was appealing for a 6th year, I kind of looked at it and was like, I don't really know if he has a great basis to get that appeal approved. But the more research I've done on it and the more people I've talked to, I actually think there's somewhat of a chance that happens. And if you get Jason Onye back, obviously that helps big time. But I still think that you need to add at least 2 defensive tackles in this board, even if you get him back. So we'll see if that happens necessarily. But it's certainly a player to keep a close eye on for sure. It could help some of the problems and the issues that you're having right now. Oh, here it is. And Jazz Bear asked about John Henry Daly, who tore his Achilles. I don't think he is an option. I think it depends ultimately, and I haven't been told necessarily it's a one or the other situation, but the fact that you're bringing in Keon Keeley on the heels of Haley being on campus, I think is very interesting and might be a little conversation point of like, if one wants to come, what do you do? Or 2 want to come, what do you do? I think that's a very, very interesting one because here's the problem with Haley, obviously. The kid had like 11 and a half sacks last year, 17 and a half tackles for loss. He was one of the best sack artists in college football this past year, was a really good player for Utah. The problem, of course, with him is that he did tear his Achilles. Now, there's been some reports out there, though, of an earlier recovery time than anticipated, usually for an Achilles tear. So I don't know if it was a partial tear or not. I haven't done enough research on it. But I would even say he's an interesting player because if you can guarantee he's back by like November, December, and you're a team in Notre Dame with the schedule that they have that anticipates a long playoff run, and I'm going to pose this in the chat to you all, would you take him if you knew that he was probably going to miss most of the regular season, but he'd be back for a playoff run and back close to 100%, if not to 100%? Would you take that player? That's interesting. Because what has been the fault of Notre Dame in the playoffs in certain instances, particularly against Ohio State in the national championship game, is you couldn't consistently get after the passer. You couldn't consistently get there, right? And if you're able to get a player like Daly that can come in obvious pass situations at worst down the stretch and affect the quarterback, that might be an interesting player to take, even if he doesn't give you much during the regular season, right? So, and I see people saying, like, take him no doubts, not getting a long playoff run with the current defense tackles. Again, Xander, I think, like, let's wait to see exactly what happens before we come to that determination. As of today, I don't necessarily disagree with your hesitancy on buying into Notre Dame with what the defensive tackle room looks like right now, but in a couple weeks, it could look a whole lot different. So let's see exactly what it looks like. I know that the early portal feedback has not been positive in that regard, but things can change. So very interested if they take a deeper look at Daly. Obviously, Kyle Whittingham is his former head coach at Utah, who's now at Michigan. So anticipate Michigan to be a big fight for Daly, but he made the visit to Notre Dame for a reason. So I'm very interested to see if he's a player that Notre Dame takes. I want to kind of end this conversation, and I don't really want to talk. And I don't know much about Jeff. I don't know enough about Cedric Smith. I saw he entered from Maryland. He looks like a good kid based on the picture I saw, but I don't know enough about him to say if that's a guy Notre Dame should definitely take a look at. But he certainly looks interesting, at least on the hoof, on paper. I don't know. But the position that I wanted to hit on, because I don't really want to talk about the Braden Atkinson stuff at quarterback right now. I mean, obviously Notre Dame is looking at a couple different types of quarterbacks. Like that's the kid out of Mercer who was just a freshman of the year on the FCS level. Very interesting if he's a player that they take to potentially be a backup for a year and then to fight for the starting job in 2027. I've seen Atkinson, because for people that don't know, I'm actually a voter on the FCS poll, on the Stats FCS poll for that level. So I watch a lot of FCS football. Didn't strike me as a kid that could play at Notre Dame watching him. Like, he's a very good FCS player, but I mean, if he's experienced backup, I guess that's all you're necessarily counting on for the year. So you at least consider it, I suppose, but not a player that I would necessarily push for if I was Notre Dame, but he was on campus. So Notre Dame at least likes some of what they see. But I really wanted to end the conversation with not kickers, because I don't talk kickers, and the Northwestern kids out there, and there's a couple other guys, and there's an Arkansas kid, I believe, that's out there that Notre Dame may have some interest in. We'll see what happens with kickers. To be honest with y'all, when I have conversations with folks, both around Notre Dame and in the agent space, I don't spend much time asking about kickers. I'm just trying to let that happen when it happens, and we'll react when it happens. I don't, no disrespect to the specialists, but as long as it's a kid that can just kick a damn field goal, I'm good. Like, just make a field goal, man. After what I just saw last year, it was so bad. Wide receiver is the one that I'm very interested to see what happens next at Notre Dame. Because with Nick Marsh off the board before you got the visit, and then Ian Strong being a player that I don't think Notre Dame actually pushed for at all, really. Like, he was on campus, but I don't think that Notre Dame was pushing extremely hard for him. The question of wide receiver is very interesting, because you had the Xavier Townsend kid. And we don't download the podcast anywhere on any podcast platforms right now, Trey, maybe somewhere in the future. But as of today, this is just a YouTube exclusive conversation. So maybe in the future. Hopefully I have it for you. The Xavier Townsend kid, though, is on campus for Iowa State, or has been on campus from Iowa State. He's an interesting player, but like, he's had like 82 receptions, somewhere in that ballpark in 4 years. Obviously, that's not a guy that's going to necessarily be a difference maker for Notre Dame on the next, if he lands with Notre Dame. He's just more of a depth piece, a guy that can potentially play on special teams as well. So like, take that for what it is. But you need a big boundary receiver. And with Nick Marsh off the board, with Notre Dame not really prioritizing Ian Strong to the degree that maybe some people believe, I do think that there are a couple interesting guys that are still on the board, but I'm struggling how much Notre Dame is going to push for. Obviously, Isaiah Canyon is a guy that people are very familiar with. He was in the 2024 recruiting class, so that would be CJ Carr's class, was committed to Notre Dame. Ended up wanting to stay close to home, though, so he ended up at Georgia Tech. He's a Georgia kid, and I heard that he's actually visiting Georgia as well. So I think there's some interest in Isaiah Canyon. But one, can Notre Dame get him up to campus? And two, can you convince him to stay up north? Because that was a huge thing that was a kind of a stickler for why he didn't want to stay in the class to begin with. So is he a player now that wants to be on at Notre Dame? I'm not really sure. We'll see if they eventually get him on a visit. Reed Harris is another guy out of Boston College. I know he has been kind of predicted to go to Arizona State. I don't know if that's been solidified as I've been on the show or not, but I think there's probably been some conversation points there, but I haven't heard about a big push for Reed Harris, which I thought was kind of interesting because he had a couple nice plays against Notre Dame, and he's 6'5", and he brings the size profile you want into the boundary, but not necessarily sure if he's the guy they're going to push for. But I think Isaiah Canyon's interesting. Don't know how much interest is going to lie there. But honestly, folks, like, as of today, the boundary market is not great right now, barring a couple guys jumping in. I would push for Trey Richardson out of Vanderbilt, who, I don't know if Notre Dame's going to have much interest in him. He's only 5'10", 175 pounds, but that kid is a legit 4'3" athlete. If you can't find and prioritize that size in the boundary, let's add speed to the wide receiver room. That would be something that I would have at a high priority for Notre Dame. Don't know if that will necessarily be what Notre Dame does. We'll see. Next step. But I would be a guy that I would definitely look for. He was predicted to UGA. Of course he was, because he was on campus with Canyon at UGA, so that would make a ton of sense. I think that was probably a mistake by Notre Dame if they at least didn't look at him. But I think it was Matt Freeman from Irish Sports Daily that reported that Mylan Graham is a point of interest for Notre Dame. He's the Ohio State player that was originally a Notre Dame target, but academically it wasn't a great fit for him coming out of high school. I had been told as well that there was at least interest in looking at Mylan Graham. I didn't know that the staff had reached out, as Matt Freeman had reported, so shout out to Matt for that report. That's an interesting player. So although he doesn't have much experience on field for Ohio State, he was a very, very talented player. Very talented player. So if you're going to go all in on the young guys, adding another very talented younger player wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. But I would love to hear from you guys of the options that are out there. Are there any that are appealing to you? Because I do think at some point, you get to a point with the wide receiver transfer portal recruiting right now where you just say, I don't know if that guy is a guy that we should take right now, because I was on this with Ian Strong, and I don't know if people agree with me, disagree with me, whatever. You let me know if you agree or disagree. But like when Notre Dame was talking about Ian Strong, and Notre Dame fans were talking about Ian Strong, and Nick Marsh was off the board, and Ian Strong looked on paper like the guy of interest, I said, I think I would rather just roll with the young guys than take Ian Strong. I think I would. Because I didn't think he was a guy, although he would improve your depth, I don't think he's a guy that I look at and say, because if he came to Notre Dame, he was going to be a starter at Notre Dame. Like money-wise, it was just going to happen. I don't know if that's a guy that really pushes you over the top. I just don't know if that's necessarily a guy. So I would have just kind of passed on him personally. I don't know if Notre Dame essentially, quote unquote, passed on him, but I just don't think that they necessarily pushed as hard as other schools did. So my question for you all is, go young, stay young. I mean, Quincy Porter's a guy in the portal. I don't know if he would have interest in Notre Dame. He visited Notre Dame before. Notre Dame liked him a lot coming out of Bergen Catholic here in New Jersey. But yep, and as Fisherman say, I saw the report as well that Quincy Porter's going to be out with a surgery in the spring, so he's going to miss part of the offseason, obviously. But would you like to go with one younger guy to add to the room, and you roll with Cam Williams, Micah Gilbert, Jordan Faison, Jaden Greathouse, and then Elijah Burris, Caden Finley, Braden Robinson, Logan Saldate? Would you rather just roll with that group? That's an interesting talking point. So make sure to put that in the chat. We'd love to hear from people. Michael Gilbert could probably be as productive as Ian Strong. I kind of agree with that, Jacob. I think if Micah Gilbert's able to stay healthy, which is the problem with Micah Gilbert. Micah Gilbert has flashed when he's had chances. It's just that Micah Gilbert is pretty constantly banged up, which is it's unfortunate, because I do think we'd be having a different conversation about wide receiver room right now if Cam Williams is a little bit further along and Micah Gilbert is more developed, or more consistently available, I should say. But I do think this is a interesting talking point of Mike Brown. When he came to Notre Dame, there were questions of how good, and yes, Keon Keeley is supposed to be at Notre Dame today. So supposed to be, Jesse. I haven't had verification if he necessarily is on campus right now, but yesterday I was told that he was going to be on campus today. So we'll see if he ends up coming or not. Mike Brown, before he got here though, was billed as a coach who has recruiting question marks because he just hadn't done it at the high level yet. But he was supposed to be a great developer. He talked about Alec Pierce and all the guys at Cincinnati and what he did with Will Pauling and getting him ready for his development, for what he did at Wisconsin specifically. And this is a big offseason to prove it. Like, this is a big offseason. You might be in a situation from the transfer portal perspective where you are forced to go young and develop your guys, which I think some people would like to do that, right? Would like to see that next step for guys like Cam Williams, like Micah Gilbert, and some of the younger cats. So this is a big offseason for Mike Brown. Big offseason. Because if you do miss a little bit in the wide receiver portal, maybe you just bring in one guy who's more of a depth piece or two guys that are more depth pieces, this is going to be on Mike Brown to be able to get the most out of this young wide receiver room. So it's going to be very interesting. Folks, I think that's going to do about me for today. I was only going to go about half an hour, and I'm right around the 45-minute mark. So before you head out of here, though, we're going to do this once a week, Wednesdays, 12 o'clock Eastern time, noon Eastern time. So make sure to subscribe to the channel so you get that little notification that I am going live. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button, all that good stuff. Make sure that you are locked in at A to Z Sports, A to Z Sports Notre Dame YouTube channel. We'll be talking transfer portal over the next couple weeks. Thank you all for joining me today. Hope everyone has a great week. Talk to you the next one. And as always, folks, you know the deal. Go Irish.